Welcome back to Everyday Economics, a podcast that helps you learn about the economic world happening around you every day. I'm your host, Chris Krug, president of the Franklin News Foundation. Everyday Economics is a production of America's Talking Network, and you can check out all of our great podcasts at americastalking.com. To support podcasts such as Everyday Economics, please make your tax-deductible charitable contribution by clicking the link in the show description. We're recording this episode on Monday, January 9th, and joining me as always, my friend, Dr. Orphe Divounguy. He's a PhD economist. Dr. O, we have new numbers in the news. The numbers came out Friday. You and I had talked about, whether or not we wanted to break these out on Friday or take a few moments and make sense of them. So we've done that. The non-farm payrolls were up 223,000 in December, and unemployment fell a tenth of a percentage point to 3.5%. Wages, however, kind of like tap the brakes a little bit. So you want to talk a little bit about that?
Oh, absolutely. There was a revision from the previous month where basically wage growth seemed to have gained some steam, but in fact, wage growth continues to cool. Wage growth is cooling because we have an increase in labor supply. It might not be a huge increase in labor supply, but it's an increase in labor supply. Overall, I think the jobs report was very positive, where the employment growth in the U.S. is slowing. We wanted to see a cooling labor market in order to get inflation under control. And that is exactly what's happening. Demand weakening means employers are not hiring at breakneck speeds anymore. We're seeing employment growth cooling. We're seeing wage growth also cooling. And this is all great. It's great because what that means is that consumer spending is likely cooling and inflation is going back in the box. So yeah, very positive jobs report. If you look at U.S. employment gains, same time last year, we were adding about 637,000 jobs per month. That's down to 307 per month in the last 6 months, 247 per month in the last month, right? And so in the final month of the year. So we have a labor market that is cooling. But the best part about it is layoffs remain very low. Most of the cooling is coming from hiring slowing down, not people losing their jobs and anything to really, really send panic on the streets.
Now, you and I talked about this off air last week. Do you feel as if employers who struggled to bring in employees, especially in lower paying, lower skilled jobs, are holding on to people that they may be struggling to hold on to simply because they don't want to go through the expense of losing them and then needing them back if there would be a change in their sales? What's your thought on this now?
Yeah, I think you have a little bit of that going on in the goods sector, but I think you have the service sector that is mostly, I think, driving the employment gains. You have a service industries that were basically left behind during the COVID pandemic and that are now recovering. And I think they're still short. They're still short some workers, and they're going to continue hiring. But the good news is they're hiring at a slower pace. And the reason they're hiring at a slower pace is because Americans are not spending at the pace they were spending at. That consumer spending growth is finally coming down, and that's good for prices.
So in the numbers, from this past report, with regard to the 223,000 jobs, it looks like once again that restaurants and the leisure hospitality industry were leading the way with 67,000. Those numbers, however, are they're more than 900,000 employees down from where they were before the pandemic started in, I guess technically in March of 2020 when we hit the pause button here in the United States. Is that industry going to come back in 2023 in your opinion, or is it going to take longer? What's going on in China right now and the restrictions that we have with regard to, to tests and whatnot to come into the United States, and concerns that masks, to be direct, very left-leaning metropolitan areas are thinking about masking again. Is it possible that we're going to be able to get back to some semblance of normal by the end of this year? That's a lot of jobs in that space to have lost and to try to make up in an 11-month period.
I don't know what's going on in some cities. I haven't paid attention to that debate. I find that where I live, everything's pretty normal. I think that it's probably, I haven't checked the numbers in terms of how many jobs are missing still from before the pandemic, but we know that a lot of people retired and are not coming back. We know a lot of people switched away from doing service jobs, but never say never, because ultimately people go where the jobs are. And so right now the jobs are in the service sector. The wage growth is the highest in the service sector. And as long as that is there, there's enough an incentive for people to go back into these industries that are struggling to hire.
One thing you had referenced earlier on, and we can end on this note, but you had talked about there being like a revision in the numbers. And in fact, I believe last year there were at least 3 revisions, if not 4 revisions.
Oh, they get revised all the time. So
can you, for the benefit of people that might not understand what that means and how they might do that, can you just offer a little insight there, please?
Those are estimates, right? They come from different surveys. The employment numbers come from establishment survey, where we're basically asking establishments, and then the other survey is from the household survey, right? And so these are estimates. They change, get revised all the time, which is why it's so important not to get hung up on just one jobs report, but to look at the complete picture. And the complete picture is employment is cooling in both surveys for most of 2022, and so that tells us that, the excess number of job openings that we had is coming down, that there's somewhat of a realignment of demand with supply. And hopefully that means prices will also come down. And so inflation may have already peaked and may be on the way down now. And that's good news. That's good news because, it actually means that the floor is not going to be swept from under most Americans who are feeling the pinch, right? Inflation has hurt a lot of wallets. The good news is, of course, people have jobs and layoffs remain relatively low when compared to any time before the pandemic. Of course, except for the stuff you hear about in the news that's going on in the tech sector.
For Orphe Divounguy, this has been Chris Krug. Subscribe to Everyday Economics and dozens of other high-quality podcasts at americastalking.com.
Are you looking for an interview podcast where you can be entertained and informed? Come check out our new podcast, America's Talking, to hear conversations with great stand-up comedians like Mark Normand.
Norm made you feel smarter than him, even though he was smarter than you.
As well as with leaders in the United States, like former Ambassador Andrew Bremberg.
I remember the fall of the evil empire, when the wall fell. Every adult I saw was crying.
I'm your host, Austin Berg, and I want you to join the conversation on our new podcast, America's Talking, right now on Spotify.